A child does not kneel at a stranger's grave unless the dead have somehow become safer than the living. Vance Holden did not know where that thought came from. It arrived in his own head in his own rough voice before he understood why the little girl was crying in the wet grass beneath his son's headstone. And once it arrived, it would not leave him. Not that night, not for a long time after. The rain had quit less than an hour before, and Hollow Pine Cemetery lay washed in silver, the grass dark and heavy with it, the gravel path shining like old bone under a tired October sun that was already sliding down toward the western ridge. Vance came here every Friday at 5:30. He came whether the sky was clear or bruised with storm, whether his knees ached from 40 years of riding, or his hands shook too badly to hold a flower straight. He came the way some men go to church, and other men go to war, because it was the one appointment in his week that grief had not yet found a way to cancel. He parked the black Harley outside the iron gate, killed the engine, and let the silence settle over him the way it always did after the rumble died. The quiet at Hollow Pine was different from any other quiet he knew. It did not press in on a man. It waited. It made room. He had come to think, the only place left in the world that did not want anything from him except that he show up, and so he showed up every Friday, like a debt that could never be paid down, but could at least be acknowledged. In his left hand, he carried a single white rose bought from the stand by the gate. In his right, a small folded flag he replaced every month beside the stone. His son had been gone 6 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Not that Vance counted out loud. Men like him were not supposed to count grief. They were supposed to swallow it, ride through it, bury it under leather and chrome, and a voice rough enough to keep sympathy at arm's length. But a man can count silently in the dark, in the places nobody can see, and Vance had been counting for 6 years. At 58, Vance looked like the kind of man people stepped aside for at gas stations and diners and crosswalks. Broad through the shoulders, under a weathered black jacket gone gray at the seams, a beard the color of wood ash, knuckles scarred from engines and from worse than engines, from years he did not talk about, and a few he tried hard to forget. Boots heavy enough to leave prints in soft ground and keep them there long after he had passed. He had spent the better part of his life being a man. Other men did not want to cross, and he had been good at it, and it had cost him nearly everything. And the only one who had ever seen through it all the way down to the bottom was buried in Section D, Row 9, beneath a maple that was just now beginning to let go of its leaves. But the closer he walked to that stone, the less dangerous he became. The grave did that to him every single time. It pulled the iron out of his spine and left behind only a father carrying flowers to a son who would never grow older than 32, who would never call on a Sunday, who would never stand in the garage doorway, again with rain on his jacket and an argument in his eyes. The grave took the armor off Vance Holden, one piece at a time, every Friday. And every Friday he put it back on before he rode home, because a man cannot ride through the world unarmored. He had learned that early, and he had never unlearned it, and it had taken a child to teach him that he had learned the wrong lesson all along. Then he saw her. At first he thought she was a trick of the failing light, a small shape folded down beside the stone, hardly more than a shadow the rain had forgotten to take with it when it left. Brown hair fell forward across her face. Her shoulders were thin, and they were trembling, wrapped in a pale blue hoodie, far too light for the cold that was already creeping up out of the ground, the way cold always did at Hollow Pine once the sun started to go. She was kneeling in the soaked grass with both hands pressed together in front of her, not quite praying, not quite begging, holding something small and fragile cupped between her palms as if it might blow away. A paper crane, white once up by him, soemas, soft now in every fold from the rain. Vance stopped so suddenly the rose nearly slipped from his fingers, and he had to close his fist around the stem to keep it. No one came to Wade's grave. No one but him. No cousins, because there were none left who cared. No old friends from the road, because the road did not visit cemeteries. The road kept moving. No former students that Vance had ever known about, because he had been too stubborn, too proud, too furious at a world that had taken his only son to ever once ask the right questions about the part of Wade's life that had nothing to do with him. The part where his boy had stood in front of rooms full of children and tried to make the world a little softer than the one his father had shown him. The girl bent closer to the headstone and whispered something. Her voice was so small the dripping trees nearly swallowed it whole, and Vance had to go very still to catch it. "I'm sorry I came late, Mr. Wade. I tried to be brave. I really tried. I'm sorry. The name landed harder than any fist Vance had ever taken, and he had taken a great many. Mr. Wade. Not Wade. Not Wade Holden. Mr. Wade, spoken with the aching, careful trust of a child who had once believed that name was just another word for safe. Vance had not heard his son called anything in 6 years. The funeral had been small, and the headstone said the rest. To hear the boy's name come out of a stranger's mouth, a child's mouth soft with grief that was not Vance's own, was like having a door he had walled shut, blown open by a wind he had not known was still blowing. His boots shifted on the gravel, and the sound of it cracked across the quiet. The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide and white at the edges. She scrambled backward through the wet grass, nearly losing her balance. One hand splayed behind her in the mud, the other clutching the paper crane to her chest with a desperate kind of strength, as though Vance had come all this way just to take it from her, as though that small wet bird were the last thing in the world she had left to lose. He lifted one hand slowly, palm open and empty, the way he would gentle a spooked animal, the way he would approach a child gone lost and frantic in the crowd at a county fair. Slow, low, no sudden motion. He had not used that particular set of movements in years, and he was surprised to find his body still remembered them, the way it remembered how to balance a bike at a dead stop or thread a wrench into a tight space by feel alone. Easy, he said, and his own voice sounded strange in his ears, lower and softer than he had meant it to be, sanded down by something. Easy now, I'm not here to scare anybody. She did not answer. Her cheeks were wet and not all of it was rain. Mud streaked the hem of her jeans. Her sneakers were soaked through dark, and one lace had snapped somewhere along the way and been knotted back together with a short length of red thread, a child's repair, careful and crooked, the kind of fix that said nobody else was going to do it for her, so she had done it herself. Vance looked from the girl to the stone where his son's name sat carved beneath three words. Beloved son, teacher, friend. Wade had picked none of those words for himself. The funeral home had offered Vance a list that gray, hollowed-out week when he could not eat or sleep or think, and he had simply put his finger on three lines without reading them properly, and the man behind the desk had nodded and written them down. And so those were the words that would mark his son for as long as the stone stood. Teacher. Vance had pointed at it without understanding it. He was beginning 6 years too late to understand it now. The rose trembled once in his hand before he forced it still. He took one careful step forward. She flinched hard, every muscle in her small body bracing, and so he stopped. He did not push. Instead of closing the distance between them, he lowered himself down onto the cold edge of the gravel path 4 feet away, ignoring the damp that soaked instantly through the seat of his jeans, ignoring the protest of knees that had carried his weight up and down off motorcycles for 4 decades. He got down to her level or near enough, and then he stayed there, big and still and harmless as he could make himself, which was not very, but he tried. For a long moment, the only sound was water dropping from the maple branches overhead, one slow beat at a time, ticking against the leaves below, like a clock that had given up on minutes and was just marking the passage of grief. Then Vance set the white rose down gently in the grass beside his son's grave and said, "That was my boy." The girl stared at him as though the ground had tilted under her knees. Her mouth opened. No words came. She looked at his jacket, the faded patches on it, his ash-gray beard, his big scarred hands resting open on his knees, then back at the carved name, then at his face again, doing some private arithmetic that no child her age should ever have had to learn how to do, weighing danger against need, fear against the thing she had walked 3 miles in the rain to find. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than breath. "Then are you the dad who could fix any engine that was broke?" Vance could not move. For a moment, he could not even breathe. Wade had said that. His son, who had died with their last real conversation, curdled into anger in a driveway with rain coming down, and a wrench dropped on concrete, and a slammed truck door had nonetheless told this child something kind about his father. Had carried Vance into a classroom as a good thing, a strong thing, a thing worth telling a frightened kid about. After everything, after the years of disappointment, Vance had been so certain were the last thing his son ever felt for him. The question reached down into a place Vance had kept welded shut for 6 years, and it pried, and something behind the well that he had thought was long dead gave a single painful flicker of life. Before he could find an answer, the girl's eyes cut toward the cemetery gate at the bottom of the slope, and fear crossed her face so fast he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Almost. But Vance had spent a lifetime reading the faces of men in bars and back rooms and hospital hallways, reading the precise moment when a calm face decides whether to run or fight, and he had not imagined it. The girl was afraid of something out past that gate, something that was not him. She tucked the paper crane up into her sleeve, hiding it, and whispered, "I have to go before he finds me." Every instinct Vance owned told him to move fast, stand up, block the path, demand a name, a who, a why. Why does a child measure the daylight like it belongs to somebody meaner than her? Why does a child flinch at a gate? Who is he? The old Vance, the one who had run loud and hard for 30 years, would have been on his feet already, would have been a wall, would have made himself into exactly the kind of immovable threat that had served him so well for so long. But Wade had been a teacher, and somewhere under 6 years of grief, Vance still kept one thing his son had said to him on one of their better afternoons back when they still had afternoons back before the driveway. Scared kids don't need louder adults, Dad. They need safer ones. So Vance stayed exactly where he was on the wet gravel, his big hands open and still on his knees, his voice pitched low enough that it blended in with the dripping maples and the settling dusk. "You don't have to run from me." The girl swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked again toward the black iron gate. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "That's a good rule," Vance said. "That's a smart one. Whoever taught you that did right by you." That seemed to surprise her, the agreement, the lack of argument. He guessed most adults tried to talk a child out of her own safety the moment that safety got inconvenient for them. He guessed she had learned not to expect a grown man to take her side against himself. He nodded toward the stone, careful not to point at her, careful to keep his hands where she could see them. "But you knew my son, so maybe I'm not exactly a stranger. Not safe yet, maybe, I'll give you that, but not all the way nothing either." She looked down at the soaked grass, her fingers tightened around the crane hidden up her sleeve. For a while she said nothing, and Vance let the nothing sit the way you let an engine idle before you ask anything of it. "Mr. Wade said some people look scary because life made them put on armor," she said finally. "He said you can't always tell what's underneath just from the outside." Vance felt the words settle hard against his ribs, settle and stay. Wade had always talked that way. Gentle ideas wrapped in plain language, small enough for a child to carry in a pocket and take out later when she needed them. Vance had ribbed him for it more than once, sitting in the garage with grease on his hands, called it soft, called it preaching, called it a lot of things that he would give the Harley and the house and both his hands to take back now. He would have given anything at all to hear that voice say one more soft thing, just one. He was right about a lot, Vance said. Not everything, though. He thought gas station coffee was acceptable, drank the stuff like it was medicine. A small sound escaped the girl before she could trap it. Not quite a laugh, close enough to make his chest ache around the old weld. "He drank hot chocolate at school," she whispered. "With the little marshmallows. The kids used to count how many he put in." Now that, Vance said, sounds more like him. "How many?" "A lot. Too many. He said it was for science." "It wasn't for science." "No," she agreed, and the corner of her mouth moved almost. "It wasn't." The wind shifted and lifted the edge of her hoodie, and Vance saw how thin it was, hardly more than a layer. How her hands had gone red raw with cold, how she was working hard not to shiver and failing at it. The way children do once they have learned that needing something can become a problem for the people around them. He knew that particular stillness. He had worn it himself as a boy in a house he did not talk about. And he recognized it now, the way you recognize your own handwriting in a stranger's letter. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sadie?" She hesitated, then added the rest carefully, like she was setting down something she might want to pick back up. "Sadie Calloway. I'm Vance Holden. Some folks call me Diesel." Like the fuel. Like the fuel. On account of I run loud, and I'm hard to stop once I get going. At least that's what they tell me. This time the small smile nearly reached her eyes. It vanished when a car rolled by slow beyond the cemetery fence, tires hissing on wet asphalt, and Sadie turned her face away from the road as if making herself smaller could make her invisible to whoever might be inside it. Vance saw it. He also saw the mud caked on the back of her jeans, the scuffed raw heels of her palms, where she had caught herself falling more than once, the way one shoulder hung lower than the other, under the weight of a small backpack that had clearly been packed in a hurry by hands that did not have much time. He did not ask the question burning a hole in his throat. Who are you running from? Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a clean handkerchief folded into a neat square out of 40 years of habit, and he laid it on the gravel between them and slid it only halfway toward her, leaving the choosing to her. For your face, he said. If you want it, no charge. Sadie stared at the cloth like it might cost her something she could not afford, like there might be a price written on the back of it in ink she could not read. Then she picked it up with two fingers, quick the way you take something you half expect to be snatched away, and wiped her cheeks. Thank you, she said, and folded it small and held on to it. You came a long way, Vance said, nodding at the gate. Not that far? How far is not that far? She pressed her lips together, weighing whether to answer. Past the old grain elevator, then across Route 6. Vance knew that road. He knew that grain elevator abandoned 20 years a rusting tower on the edge of the county. Nearly 3 miles if she had walked the shoulder of the highway. More if she had stayed off the main stretch where someone might see her and stop, which a smart, frightened child would have done. His stomach pulled tight, but he kept his face like still water the way he had kept it across 100 poker tables and a few worse rooms. That's a long walk in wet shoes, he said. She looked down fast, ashamed. They dry. Sometimes. The sky dropped another shade toward dark. Down by the gate, the first evening lights blinked on around the little cemetery office, and beside the stone wall, an old woman in a quilted coat was closing up the flower stand. She ran there stacking unsold carnations into a white plastic bucket against the cold. Hattie Boone had sold flowers at Hollow Pine longer than Vance had been coming, longer than Wade had been buried, longer, maybe than anyone could rightly remember. She was part of the place the way the maple was the way the iron gate was. Vance lifted one hand toward her, not waving wild, just enough to catch her eye through the gathering dusk. Hattie paused, her hands full of carnations. She saw the child kneeling in the grass, and her whole face changed in that silent way old women have, the way where the heart understands a thing whole seconds before the mouth catches up to it, where decades of watching the world go by behind a flower stand had taught her to know trouble and need on sight. Sadie noticed the look pass between them and edged backward on the gravel, alarm flaring. Please don't tell anybody. I'm not going to make trouble for you, Vance said, but I'm not going to let you walk back cold and hungry in the dark either. Those two things can both be true at once. A man can be on your side and still not let you do something dangerous. Her eyes filled again, fast and quiet, and she looked angry at the tears, furious at them, like crying was one more thing she might catch trouble for using up. I'm not hungry, she said. At that exact second, her stomach gave a long, hollow growl that sounded enormous in the cemetery hush, and there was no taking it back. Sadie wrapped both arms around herself, scarlet with shame, mortified down to her wet shoes. Vance looked away on purpose, out toward the ridge, where the last of the light was going copper, giving her the dignity of not being watched in her hunger. I get hungry too, he said, easy, like it was nothing, like they were two people passing time. Especially after I've been talking to folks who drink their cocoa with too many marshmallows. Makes a man jealous. I never had anybody put marshmallows in anything for me. Hattie was already coming up the path with a paper cup steaming in one hand and a careful, unhurried smile on her face, the smile of a woman who had learned exactly how slow to move so as not to startle a frightened thing. Vance stayed put, but he shifted his weight, keeping his big body angled between Sadie and the open gate, without ever making it feel like a wall, leaving her a clear line of sight to everything, taking nothing away. That's Mrs. Boone, he said to the girl. She sells flowers here. Known me long enough to know I'm grouchy, but mostly harmless. Ask her. She'll tell you I'm more bark than bite, and she's not wrong. Sadie did not smile this time. Her eyes had dropped to her own wrist, where the sleeve of her hoodie had ridden back just far enough for Vance to catch a glimpse of dark blue ink on pale skin. 2 words written in a child's blocky, uneven hand. Ask Wade. The whole world went very quiet around him, quieter even than the cemetery had been. Before he could say anything, before he could even fix his eyes properly on the words, Sadie yanked the sleeve down over her knuckles and whispered, I wasn't supposed to let anybody see that. You weren't supposed to see that. Hattie Boone climbed the last of the wet path slowly, one careful step at a time, holding the paper cup in both hands, like it was something holy instead of gas station. Cocoa warmed in the little microwave behind her stand. She had a face made out of soft wrinkles and hard years, And when she reached them, she did not ask Sadie why she was out here alone in the dark, or why her shoes were soaked clean through, or where on earth her mother might be. She had raised children and buried a husband and sold flowers to the grieving for 50 years, and she knew that questions were a luxury a frightened child could not always afford. She just lowered the cup onto the flat top of a nearby stone bench within reach, but not too near, and said, "This place gets colder than people figure once the sun's gone down behind that ridge. Always has. I keep a thermos going for myself this time of year." There was extra. Sadie looked at the cocoa, then at Vance, then back toward the gate, the war happening behind her eyes plain as anything. Trust trying to lift its head, fear shoving it back down. Hunger arguing with every warning she had ever been taught, and a few she had taught herself. "You can drink it right there," Hattie said gently, settling herself onto the far end of the bench with the small grunt of an old woman's knees. "No need to come closer to anybody. No need to do anything at all but sit a minute where it's not raining." Sadie took the cup in both hands. Steam curled up around her small face, and for 1 second, she looked less like a child carrying something far too heavy for her, and more like a child who had simply been handed something warm on a cold day, which was all she was underneath, all she should ever have had to be. Vance kept his eyes fixed on the maple over Wade's grave, granting her the mercy of not being looked at while she drank, listening to the small, careful sip, each one a little less careful than the last. "I've seen you before, sweetheart," Hattie said after a while, her voice as careful as a foot finding its way across ice. "3 times this month, I'd put money on it. You bought the yellow carnations last Tuesday. The old ones, the ones I was about to throw out." Sadie froze with the cup halfway to her mouth. "They were still flowers," she said defensive quick. "They were still good." Hattie's smile crept up soft and sad. "They were. And Wade always liked yellow. He told me that once. Said it made a classroom look less tired. Said tired classrooms made tired kids, and tired kids couldn't learn. So he was going to fight tired with the cheapest weapon he could find, which was $1's worth of yellow flowers." Vance turned his head slowly toward the old woman. "You knew my son liked yellow." Hattie looked at him, then full on with a sadness that had clearly been sitting in her chest for years, waiting all this time for the right door to open so it could come out. "Your boy came by now, and again Diesel, back when he was teaching over at Calder Elementary before the accident. Bought dollar flowers off me sometimes for kids who'd had a hard week. Never made a show of it. Never wanted thanks. Just told me once, leaning on this very wall, that some children need proof the world still notices them. Said a flower was cheap proof, but it was real proof, and real beat expensive every time." She paused. "I cried at his funeral, Vance. You probably don't remember. You weren't in a state to remember much. But I was there in the back. I'd have told you all this then if you'd been able to hear it." The cemetery seemed to tilt under Vance. 6 years of standing at this grave every Friday, rain or shine, and he had never once known that his own son had walked these same paths with flowers in his fist for children whose names Vance had never thought to ask. His boy had been here at Hollow Pine alive buying yellow carnations off Hattie Boone, and Vance had buried him here without ever knowing the place had already belonged to Wade in a way long before it took him. Sadie stared down into her cocoa. "He gave my mom yellow ones once," she said very quietly. "When she got the interview at the laundry place over on Hutchins Street, she didn't get the job, but she got the interview, and Mr. Wade said an interview was a start, and he brought her yellow flowers to say so." Her voice thinned out to almost nothing. "She put them in a jelly jar, kept them till they were just dry stems, and then she kept the stems too. They're still in the jar. Or they were. I don't know if they still are. We don't live there anymore." Vance let the words breathe before he laid a hand near them, gentle as he could. "Where do you live now, Sadie, you and your mom?" The girl's shoulders climbed up toward her ears like the question itself was made of cold. "Home," she said, which was an answer that was not an answer, and they both knew it. "Does she know you came here, your mom?" Sadie did not answer that at all. She looked into the cocoa as if there was something written on the bottom of the cup that she was trying very hard to read. The sky dimmed another notch. The cemetery lights hummed on, one by one along the path, pale circles opening in the dark and like a string of small moons. Hattie and Vance traded a single look over the child's bent head. Not dramatic, not panicked, just the quiet old alarm of two adults who had each lived long enough to understand that a child's silence can carry more truth than anything a child is ever allowed to say out loud, and that the silences are where you have to listen hardest. Vance lowered his voice another notch until it was barely above the dripping of the trees. Did somebody write those words on your wrist, Sadie? The ones on your arm? You can tell me, or you cannot tell me. Either one is all right. Sadie pulled her sleeve tight over her knuckles, gripping it. I did. I did it myself. With a pen. Ask Wade, Vance said softly, not a question, just laying the words gently in the open between them. That's what it says. Her eyes flooded again and again. She looked furious at her own tears, swiping at them with the back of the hand that held the handkerchief. So I wouldn't forget, she said. Forget what? She swallowed, and her voice when it came was small and steady in the way that costs a child everything to manage. What he told me. Mr. Wade. He said if things ever got bad again, ask Wade. Find Wade. He'd help. But he's not here anymore. She looked at the stone. So I came to where he is. I thought maybe a grave can still hear you. If you talk close enough, if you say it right. I didn't know where else to put it. Hattie pressed a hand flat against her own chest hard, as if to keep something from getting out. Vance held himself perfectly still, because he understood now with a clarity that frightened him, that if he moved too fast, the grief in him would turn frightening to her. And if he spoke too loud, the old anger would borrow his mouth and ruin the only thing that mattered, which was that this child keep talking, keep trusting, keep choosing the warm cup over the cold road. So he breathed one slow and deep, tasting rain, and cut grass and cold stone, and the faint sweetness of the cocoa on the air. What got bad again, Sadie? She looked past him toward the gate. A pickup truck rolled by on the road beyond the fence, slower than the cars before it's slow enough that its tires whispered on the wet pavement like something sneaking. It did not stop. But Sadie shrank down behind the paper cup as if the sound of it had reached through the iron bars in the dark, in the distance, and touched her directly on the spine. Vance's jaw set hard. He knew that kind of fear, the kind that arrives before the proof does, the kind that lives in the body and reads the world through the skin. He had carried it himself long ago in places he did not talk about, in clubhouses, gone wrong in the cab of a truck on a bad night, in hospital, waiting rooms where the doctors would not meet his eyes because the news was already written on their faces. He knew that fear the way he knew the sound of his own engine, and he hated to see it living in a body this small. Sadie, he said, you are not in any trouble with me. None. Whatever's got you scared, it's not me, and it's not going to become me. Everybody says that, she whispered, right before they send you back. The words came out before she could catch them, before she could weigh them, and then she clamped her mouth shut so hard her chin dimpled and dented, horrified at herself at what she had let slip. Hattie glanced down the slope toward the small white chapel beside the office, its windows lit warm and gold. Reverend Vaughn is still here, she said. I saw his car. He keeps a heater going in there this time of year and crackers in the pantry for the food bank. We could all sit inside where the door stays propped open and every light is on where it's bright and warm. Nobody'd have to do anything but sit. You could keep your cocoa. Sadie shook her head fast. I have to go. I have to get back. Not alone, Vance said. Then softer, faster before the word could land on her like an order, like a cage. Not because I'm telling you what to do. You've had enough of people telling you what to do, I'd guess. But because it's full dark now and you walked near 3 miles to get here in wet shoes and a safe grown-up does not let a kid walk back into the dark like that. That's a rule, too, same as not talking to strangers. A real one. She stared at him a long, weighing moment, the cocoa steaming, forgotten in her hands. How do I know you're safe? You're a stranger, too. You're a big, scary stranger in a graveyard at night. The question did not offend him. It humbled him right down to the cold gravel he sat on. It was, he thought, the smartest question anyone had asked him in years, and the bravest, and she had asked it to his face with her chin up even while she was shaking. He looked at his son's name carved in the stone, then back at the girl Wade had once protected with flowers and cocoa, and words gentle enough to outlive him by 6 years. You don't have to know yet, he said. That's the honest answer. You don't have to know. You only have to know that I'm willing to be checked. Mrs. Boone here knows me going back years. Reverend Vaughn down there knows me. We can call out Deputy Briggs, who's got a badge and a radio and a real good reason not to trust me any more than you do. And you can talk to her, and she can stand right there the whole time. Because here's the thing, your mister. Wade had right, and a lot of grown-ups have wrong. Safe people don't ask you to hide them. Safe people don't say, keep this between us. Safe people bring more safe people into the room and turn on all the lights. You remember that you'll be able to spot the dangerous ones every time, no matter how nice they talk. Sadie held the cocoa close to her chest, trembling harder now, because the warmth of it had reminded her body just how cold the rest of her had gotten, the way warmth always does. She looked at him. She looked at Hattie. She looked down the slope at the warm gold windows of the little chapel. And at last, after a long time, she gave one small nod. Vance rose slowly, putting plenty of space between them as he stood, letting her see every part of the motion so that nothing would surprise her. Hattie moved to walk on Sadie's left, close and warm. Vance fell in a few steps behind, close enough to put his own body between the child and any trouble that came up the path, far enough back that he was not crowding her, not hurting her, leaving her room to feel like she was choosing each step herself because she was. But halfway down to the chapel, Sadie stopped. She turned and looked back up the slope at Wade's grave, small and gray, now under the maple in the dark, the white rose just barely visible beside it. "Can I leave him the crane first?" she asked. "I brought it for him. It's not right to take it back." Vance could not get his voice to work, so he nodded. She walked back up alone, her small figure crossing the wet grass. She knelt and set the damp paper bird down at the base of the stone, right next to Vance's white rose, arranging it carefully so it would not blow away, propping it against the granite. Then she leaned close to the carved name and whispered something Vance only just caught on the wind that came up the slope. "I found your dad. Please let that mean something. Please let it have been worth it." The chapel at Hollow Pine was small enough that Vance could take in every corner of it from the doorway, and that more than the heat or the light or anything, Hattie or the Reverend said, was what finally let Sadie breathe. Reverend Otis Vaughn had left the lights low and warm, the lamps, rather than the hard white overheads. Not the kind of light that makes a frightened person feel like a thing laid out under examination. A space heater ticked and hummed near the front pew, pushing out the good smell of dust and old varnished wood and decades of candle wax. Hattie steered Sadie to a bench near the propped open door, where the girl could see both the way in and the way out, while Vance stayed back against the rear wall, arms loose at his sides, making himself as small as a man built like a barn door could manage, which was not small at all, but he folded his shoulders in and lowered his chin and did what he could. Reverend Vaughn came out of the little side office carrying a sleeve of saltine crackers, 2 paper napkins, and the steady-worn kindness of a man who had spent 30 years sitting beside people on the very worst days of their lives and had learned that the work was mostly just staying in the room. He did not ask Sadie for the whole story. He did not tell her to settle down or calm down or stop crying. He simply set the crackers on the bench between her and Hattie within easy reach and said, "You're welcome in here as long as you need the light, young lady. No charge for it and no questions you don't want to answer. The light's free, the crackers are free, the bench is free. That's about all I've got, but it's yours." Sadie ate slowly at first, then with the careful, deliberate restraint of a child working very hard not to look as hungry as she truly was, taking small bites, setting the cracker down between them, picking it back up. Vance kept his face turned toward the dark window, giving her room. But every small sound seemed to land somewhere deep inside him and stay there. The crinkle of the cracker sleeve, the whisper of her wet shoes shifting against the old floorboards, the little catch of breath she took before deciding whether the room was safe enough to hold the next true thing she had to say. "Mr. Wade used to sit like that," she said suddenly into the quiet. Vance looked over. "Like what?" "Like he was listening with his whole face." Her fingers worried the torn edge of a napkin. "When kids talked too fast or cried too much or couldn't get the words out right, he wouldn't cut in. He wouldn't finish it for you. He said sometimes words got to come out crooked before they can come out true. And if you fix them too fast, they just stay crooked forever inside." Reverend Vaughn lowered himself into a chair at the end of the aisle, slow and easy. Hattie folded her hands in her lap. Nobody rushed her. Nobody filled the silence. And that seemed to puzzle Sadie more than shouting ever could have this room full of grown-ups who would simply wait for her. "He was only my teacher for 6 weeks," she went on when she was ready. "Mrs. Aldridge had to have her gallbladder out, so he came to fill in for the rest of the spring. Everybody liked him right away because he could draw motorcycles on the board, real ones with the engine and everything, and he'd let you ask for one if you finished your work. But I liked him because he noticed things. He was the noticing kind." Vance felt his throat draw tight around the old weld. Wade had noticed everything even as a small boy. A bird with a bent wing on the sidewalk. A kid eating alone at the far, cold end of the lunch table. A stray dog limping along the highway shoulder in the heat. Vance had called it softness once more than once because he had not understood, would not let himself understand that it took more courage to keep noticing in a hard world than it took to stop. That a man who keeps his eyes open to other people's pain is braver than a man who learns to ride past it. What did he notice about you? Vance asked. Sadie looked down at her hands a long moment. That I saved half my lunch, she said. Every day. I'd eat half and wrap the rest back up real careful and put it in my bag. For later, she shook her head. For Mom. The room went still. Not from shock. From respect, all three of the grown-ups falling quiet at once for the weight of what a small child had been carrying back and forth in a lunch sack, the arithmetic of it, half a sandwich a day, the long patient hunger of it. He never made me feel bad about it, Sadie said. Mr. Wade, he could have. Some grown-ups would have made it a whole big thing called somebody made me explain it in front of everybody. He just started bringing extra granola bars to class and saying he bought too many at the store on accident. Did anybody want one? And he'd kind of look at me when he said it, but not in a way that anybody else would notice. So I could take one without it being charity. And then one day he asked real quiet, did my mom like yellow flowers? And I said she used to before things got hard. And the next day he got her some from Mrs. Boone. Hattie looked away and blinked hard at the chapel wall, her jaw working. Vance was seeing his son in pieces, now assembling him out of a stranger's memory. Not the young man he had argued with in a driveway with rain coming down. A different Wade. A quiet figure moving through classrooms and flower stands in the lives of children whose families were slipping through every crack the world had, building safety out of small things that nobody else bothered to count, that cost almost nothing and meant almost everything. A granola bar bought on purpose and offered like an accident. $1's worth of yellow flowers. The exact right amount of not noticing so a hungry child could keep her dignity intact. The memory came at him then without mercy, the way the worst ones always did, unbidden and complete. Wade at 26, standing in the open doorway of Vance's garage with rain on the shoulders of his jacket and frustration burning in his eyes, saying he wanted to do more, wanted to help the kids whose families were falling through, saying the school could only do so much, and he wanted to do the rest. And Vance on his back on the creeper under a flatbed, pretending the carburetor mattered more than his son's voice, pretending he was too busy to turn his head. You can't save every broken kid, Wade, he had said. Up into the underside of a truck. Not to his son's face. You'll wear yourself down to nothing trying. He remembered the exact sound of the wrench hitting the concrete when Wade went quiet, the flat ring of it. And he remembered his son's answer, soft, but with iron running through the middle of it, iron the boy had gotten from somewhere, maybe from him. Maybe not Dad, but I can quit pretending I don't see them. You taught me that. You just forgot you taught it. Vance had not asked what he meant. He had stayed under the truck. And Wade had left and gotten in his own truck, and that had been one of the last real talks they ever had a handful of weeks before the road took Wade in the dark and the wet on Route 6, the same road this child had walked 3 miles of to find him. Vance had spent 6 years replaying that garage doorway like a sentence handed down by a judge he could never reach to appeal. In the chapel, Sadie reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded worksheet gone soft and gray as cloth from being opened and refolded too many times. Across the top in Wade's neat, even teacher's print were the words, "Things that make me feel safe," and underneath in Sadie's own uneven pencil, careful and crooked, a list. Warm soup, Mom singing, locked windows, Mr. Wade, yellow flowers, people who knock before they open the door. Vance stared at that last line until the pencil marks swam and blurred together. People who knock before they open the door. He understood reading it that there had been people in this child's life who did not knock, that a closed door had not meant safe to her, that the simplest courtesy in the world, the thing every decent person does without even thinking, had been rare enough in her short life to earn a place on a list of safe things. He gave you that? Vance asked. His voice had gone rough. Sadie nodded. He had everybody make one, the whole class. He said if you could name the safe things, write them down, then you could find them again when you needed them, even on a day when your brain forgot. He said feelings lie sometimes, but a list don't. She touched the paper like it was a map to somewhere she was trying to get back to. After he died, I kept trying to use it. I kept reading it, but the safe things kept disappearing on me. One at a time. Locked windows went first. Vance wanted to tell her he was sorry. The two words rose up in him, and he found they were far too small an insult almost for a child who had walked 3 miles in wet shoes to ask a dead man for help because the living had run out on her. Then Sadie reached deeper into the backpack and drew out a thin wrinkled envelope sealed shut with old tape gone brown and brittle at the edges from years of handling. Across the front in Wade's handwriting was a name Vance had not expected to ever see, a name he did not know. Carolyn Calloway. Sadie held it against her chest with both hands. My mom said this letter is the whole reason Mr. Wade mattered, she whispered. She read it to me so many times I know parts by heart. And she said if things ever got bad enough, real bad, the worst kind of bad, I should find the man who taught Mr. Wade how to fix what other people threw away. That's what the letter says. That there's a man. Vance's hands went cold and still at his sides. Reverend Alvon glanced at him across the small chapel. Hattie did too, but Sadie did not hand the letter over. Not yet. She held it tight and looked toward the propped open door out into the full dark of the cemetery beyond it, and her voice dropped down to almost nothing at all, to the very bottom of itself. I think somebody followed me here, she said. I think he's coming. Sitting there on the chapel floor with the worksheet in his hands, Vance found himself remembering his son's small. Not the young man in the driveway. The boy. Wade at 7 in the garage, perched on an overturned crate too close to the work, because Vance had never once been able to make him keep a safe distance from anything broken. The boy had wanted to know why Vance kept the worst engines, the ones other men would have hauled to the scrapyard. The seized blocks, the cracked heads, the ones that came in on a flatbed already pronounced dead by 3 other shops. Because somebody gave up on them, Vance had said, not really thinking, just talking the way a man talks while his hands work. And I don't like to agree with quitters. What if it can't be fixed? Then I'll know I tried. But most things can be fixed, son. Most things people call broke are just things nobody took the time on. There's a difference between broke and abandoned. Folks mix them up all the time. He had said it to a 7-year-old over a dead carburetor and forgotten it inside the hour. Wade had not forgotten it. Wade had built a whole life on it, had carried it into a classroom, and handed it out to hungry children. A flower and a granola bar at a time, had written it down in a letter to a drowning woman, had said it to his own father's face in a driveway, and gotten silence back. There's a difference between broke and abandoned. Vance had taught his son the truest thing the boy ever knew, and then spent 6 years proving he had abandoned the lesson himself. He remembered Wade's mother too, sitting on the floor of that chapel, though he did not often let himself. Wade had been 9 when she got sick and 10 when she died, and Vance had handled it the only way he knew, which was to get harder and louder and to be gone or riding, working anywhere but the house with the empty chair in it. He had thought he was protecting the boy from his own grief. He understood now, far too late, that all he had done was teach a 10-year-old that when things broke, the men in his family rode away from them. Wade had grown up and done the exact opposite. Wade had run toward broken things his whole short life, as if to correct his father's error, one child at a time. The boy had raised himself in a lot of ways on the leftover lessons of a father who was barely there, and somehow he had taken the few good ones and thrown out the bad, the way you sort a box of mismatched bolts and keep only the ones with good threads. Vance did not know how a child did that. He did not know where the wisdom came from to keep broke as fixable and throw out the men in this family right away. But Wade had done it. Wade had been better than the materials he was made from. And Vance had been too busy being the materials to notice the boy improving on them. You went quiet, Sadie said from the floor beside him. Thinking about my boy. The good kind of thinking or the bad kind? Vance considered that because she deserved a true answer and because it was a better question than most adults knew how to ask. Both, he said. It's the kind where the good and the bad are so wound up together you can't pull them apart. Remembering something good he did, and right behind it, remembering, I didn't tell him I saw it. They come as a pair. They always come as a pair. The remembering and the wishing, I'd said something. You'll have that someday about people you love. Hopefully a long time from now. The trick your Mr. Wade knew that I'm just learning is you say it now. Whatever it is, you say it out loud while the person's still in the room to hear it. Saves you the second half of the pair. Sadie nodded slowly. Then she said, I'm glad you're the one who found me. Out of all the grown-ups who could have been at the grave, I'm glad it was you. Vance had to look hard at the dark window for a moment. I'm glad too, kid, he managed, and I said it out loud. So that's one I won't have to wish about later. The words had barely left her when headlights swung across the dark cemetery beyond the open door, bright for one held breath, then dimmed as a vehicle rolled to a careful stop on the gravel outside. And these headlights did not pass on the way the others had. They slowed, they turned in through the gate, they stopped. Sadie went so rigid that the cracker in her hand snapped clean in two, the halves dropping to the bench. Vance saw it all in an instant, the way he used to see a road hazard a half-second before it became a wreck. He crossed the small chapel in 3 quiet strides and took the envelope gently from the girl's frozen fingers, and he tucked it away inside his own jacket against his chest unread, because whatever his son had written down 6 years ago could keep for 5 more minutes. A living child could not. Stay close to Mrs. Boone, he said low and even, not an order so much as a rope thrown to someone in deep water. Reverend Vaughn rose from his chair and stepped into the aisle calm, deliberate, putting his own body loosely between the door and the bench. That ought to be Deputy Briggs, he said. She doesn't waste time when she's called out. But before any cruiser door opened, a second set of tires hissed over the wet gravel. Beyond the first, faster, more aggressive, and a gray pickup truck turned hard through the gate and parked at a crooked angle near Hattie's flower stand, its engine still running, its headlights still burning straight at the chapel. Sadie's face emptied out. Not into tears, into something far worse, something flat and gone, and practiced the face of a child who had learned long ago that fear shown too plainly only ever made things harder for her who had been taught to swallow it and go still. A man in a tan work jacket climbed down from the pickup. Average height, clean haircut, recently cut, clean boots that had plainly never seen the inside of a real job site. The kind of man who could walk into a bank or a school office or a courtroom and be believed before he ever opened his mouth, because the world is built to believe men who look like him. He looked toward the chapel, found the small shape of the girl through the open door, and his face arranged itself into a tight, warm smile that did not come within a country mile of his eyes. Sadie, he called, and his voice was smooth as poured oil pitched to carry, pitched for any witness who might be listening. There you are, honey. Lord, you scared the whole house half to death. We've been looking everywhere. Deputy Joan Briggs stepped out of her cruiser at the same moment, unhurried, one hand resting easy near the radio on her shoulder. Her posture loose, but her eyes already working, the scene, taking the measure of the truck, the man, the chapel, the child. She was somewhere in her 40s with rain beaded on the brim of her hat and the steady, unimpressed carriage of a woman who had learned the hard way over a long career never to mistake good manners for the truth of a thing. Sir, she said, I'm going to need you to hold up right there a minute. The man lifted both hands, easy, cooperative, the very picture of a reasonable citizen with nothing to hide. Of course, Deputy. Whatever you need, I'm happy to help. I'm Gerald Pruitt. That's my niece in there. She wanders off when she gets herself worked up. Real big imagination on that one. We've been trying to get her some help for it as a family, but it's slow going. You know how it is. Sadie sank smaller against the back of the pew. Hattie did not touch her, but she shifted on the bench casual, just an old woman getting comfortable. And in shifting, she put her own soft bulk squarely between the child and the open doorway between Sadie and the man's line of sight. Vance stayed against the rear wall. Every old instinct he owned strained toward that door, toward becoming the kind of man Gerald Pruitt would have nightmares about for a week, the kind of man who could end a thing like this in about 4 seconds with nobody the wiser. But Sadie had told him plain in the grass by the grave, he does things people can't see. So Vance made a different choice, the hardest one he had made in years, harder than burying his son, almost. He decided to make every single thing in this room seen, to turn every light on, to do the exact opposite of everything that had ever come naturally to him. Deputy, he said, and his voice carried flat and clear and quiet across the little chapel. No heat in it, just facts laid down one at a time like tools on a bench. The child walked here on foot, from out past the grain elevator across Route 6, near 3 miles in wet shoes in the dark. She reports her mother may need medical attention at home and is not responding. Reverend Vaughn already placed the call for a welfare check at the residence before this man ever pulled in that gate. That's all on the record now. Gerald's smile pulled a fraction tighter at the corners, and behind the warmth, something cold turned over just once. I sure do appreciate the concern, friend, he said. But you don't know the first thing about our situation. My cousin Carolyn has got health problems. Bad ones. She sleeps half the day, forgets things. And the girl, well, she gets anxious and she tells stories when she wants attention. Always has. It's part of what we're getting her help for. Vance felt those words drift down over the truth like a man scattering dust across a clean tabletop, trying to gray everything out to muddy the water before anyone could lean in and look at the bottom of it. He had used that trick himself a long time ago. He knew it from the inside. Deputy Briggs glanced towards Sadie through the door, but she did not call out across the dark, did not demand that the child perform her terror for an audience of strangers. Instead, she turned to Reverend Vaughn. Is the child warm? Reverend Fed safe right where she is this minute? She is, the Reverend said. The door stayed propped open the whole time she's been here. Mrs. Boone and I have not once left her side. She's had cocoa and crackers and a place to sit out of the rain. That's the sum of what's happened here. Good. Briggs turned back toward the gravel and the man standing in his own headlights. Gerald took one easy, reasonable step closer to the chapel steps. I can just run her on home right now, deputy, take her off everybody's hands. This has all gone a good deal further than it ever needed to. No harm done. I'll have her tucked in bed inside the hour. And Sadie made a sound. It was so small it would have been lost on anyone not listening with their whole heart. A single intake of breath caught and held the sound of a child bracing for something. Vance heard it, and he watched Deputy Briggs hear it too. Watched it register in the almost invisible stiffening of her shoulders, the way a good cop's whole body becomes an instrument for catching exactly that kind of sound. She turned back to Gerald. Not yet. 2 words. They change the air in the cemetery the way the pressure changes before a front rolls through a thing you feel in your teeth before you understand it. Gerald's expression held smooth, but the cold thing behind his eyes moved again longer this time, the way you sometimes see a big fish turn over in still, dark water. Deputy, with all respect, he said, and now there was the faintest edge under the oil. I'm her guardian for tonight. Her mother is not well enough to look after her. And this gentleman here, he let his gaze travel slowly, deliberately over Vance, over the leather, the faded club patches still legible on the chest. The gray beard, the heavy boots painting the picture for everyone, hanging it on the wall for the deputy to see, is a stranger in motorcycle colors standing in a graveyard after dark with a little girl who isn't his. I'd think your concern might run a different direction than it's running. And there it was. The whole picture laid out clean and complete, exactly the way Gerald wanted it seen. A frightened, confused little girl. A rough and dangerous biker. A simple, regrettable misunderstanding that any reasonable person could sweep away in a minute if only the right adult kept sounding calm and clean and decent enough while he did the sweeping. Vance did not defend the jacket. He did not say a word about the patches or the bike or the look of himself. He had spent 58 years learning that you cannot argue a man out of a prejudice he finds useful. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat in plain view of the deputy and drew out the envelope and held it up so she could see the front of it, the handwriting, the name. Wade Holden was my son, he said. He's buried right up that hill, section D, 6 years gone. Sadie came here tonight because Wade once helped her and helped her mother back when he was teaching at Calder Elementary. She carried this letter the whole way. It's addressed to Carolyn Calloway in my son's hand. I have not read it yet. I was about to when he drove in. Deputy Briggs' eyes sharpened to 2 fine points. May I see that envelope, Mr. Holden? Vance crossed to the doorway, every motion slow, and announced and passed it out to her through the prop door. Gerald let out a small, indulgent laugh, the laugh of a patient man surrounded by foolishness. A 6-year-old letter from a dead substitute teacher. Come on now, that's not a legal document, deputy. That's a scrap of paper a confused kid's been hauling around. No, Briggs said, turning the envelope over in her hands, studying the name that taped the soft, worn corners of it. It's not a legal document, but it's context. And context matters a great deal when a child walks 3 miles in the rain to ask somebody for help. I've been doing this a long time, Mr. Pruitt. Children don't walk 3 miles in wet shoes to a graveyard for attention. They walk 3 miles in wet shoes to a graveyard to get away from something. Gerald's jaw shifted just slightly, the first real crack in the smooth surface of him. For one moment, the impatience underneath showed through hot and tight and unused to being told no, the impatience of a man who had spent a long time getting his way, by sounding reasonable and had not planned on it failing him tonight. "Sadie," he said, turning his face toward the chapel door, and his voice was very quiet now, very gentle, gentle in a way that made the hair stand up on Vance's arms. "Come on out here now, honey. Come to me. Don't make this into a thing." And Sadie recoiled as if a rope had been thrown around her ribs and yanked tight from across the gravel. Her whole body curled in on itself. Her breath went fast and shallow. Deputy Briggs stepped sideways a half-pace smooth, putting herself directly across the line between the man and the door between the man and the child. "Mr. Pruitt, you're not going to direct the child right now. You're going to step back to your truck and you're going to wait there. We're past the part where you decide how this goes." Inside the chapel, Vance watched Sadie's small hand creep into her open backpack and come out again with the folded worksheet, the soft gray one with Wade's print across the top. Her fingers shook so hard the paper rattled, but she held it up out toward the deputy who had stepped just inside the threshold now. "He told me," Sadie said, and her voice was thin, but it did not break. "Safe people bring other safe people into the room. He wrote it down for me. So when he wasn't there anymore, I'd still remember how to tell. Safe people turn the lights on. They don't make you go out into the dark with just them." Deputy Briggs took the worksheet from the child's shaking hand as carefully as if it were the most important piece of evidence she had ever been handed, which Vance thought, watching her face, it just might have been. She read it. He watched her eyes track down the short, crooked list. Watch them slow at the line about people who knock before they open the door. Watch something settle into her expression that was no longer neutral at all. Something hard and certain and final. And then her radio crackled to life on her shoulder. A flat dispatcher's voice, careful in the way those voices go careful when they do not want to say too much over an open channel that anyone might be listening to. Medical responders had reached the residence on Route 6. They were requesting the deputy's presence as soon as she was able to break free. Sadie squeezed her eyes shut tight. Her lips moved without sound. Gerald stopped smiling entirely. The warmth went out of his face all at once, like a light switched off, and for one unguarded second the man underneath was visible to the whole cemetery, and he was not warm at all. Briggs keyed the radio without taking her eyes off him. "Copy. I'm at Hollow Pine Cemetery off Route 6. I have the child. She's safe and with me. Hold one. What's the status on the adult female at that residence? Be advised I have a related party on scene." The radio hissed and spat. Then the voice came back slower, picking its words. "Adult female located. Unresponsive on arrival. Now responsive and being prepped for transport to Mercy General for evaluation. Possible medication concern. Advise the deputy. Follow up regarding the household and any custody questions." Sadie's breath broke once ragged, a small, torn sound. Hattie leaned in close beside her, not touching, just bringing her warmth nearer, and whispered, "She's getting help now, sweetheart. They got to her in time. You hear that? They got to her. She's going to a good hospital, and they're going to help her. You did that. You walk in here. You did that." Vance closed his eyes for half a second. He had learned a long time ago that good news could still cut a man wide open when it arrived through a door made out of fear, that relief and terror can wear the exact same face. "Possible medication concern." Deputy Briggs repeated slow and even, and she turned to look at Gerald Pruitt now with an entirely different kind of attention, the kind that has stopped being polite. "Mr. Pruitt, Carolyn Calloway's medications. Who manages those in the household? Who's responsible for them?" Gerald spread his hands in easy gesture gone just slightly too wide. "She does. Carolyn does. I help where I can, but she's a grown woman. She's forgetful is all. Sleeps too much, takes too much, forgets what she's taken. It's the depression. We've all been worried sick about it." "Where does she keep them, the medications?" A beat, just one beat too long. But Vance saw it, and he knew by the slight shift in her stance that the deputy saw it too. "In her room, I'd imagine," Gerald said. "I don't go through a grown woman's private things." And from the bench, in a voice gone suddenly thin and steady, all at once the steadiness of a child laying down a thing she has been afraid to say for a very long time, Sadie spoke. "They're in the kitchen, in the locked box on the high shelf. Uncle Gerald keeps the key for it on his ring with the truck keys, 'cause he says Mom takes too many when she's sad, and he has to keep them safe from her. He gives them to her. He decides how many. He says it's for her own good." The chapel went completely silent except for the patient tick of the space heater. Gerald's face did something fast and complicated there, and gone several things at once that did not match each other. "She's a confused little girl, deputy," he said, and the oil was back, but it had thinned. You could hear the water under it now. "She doesn't understand what she's saying. She's mixing things up the way she does." "She understands fine," Vance said. He had not planned to speak, but it came up out of him low and certain, and it carried to every corner of the small room, and once it was out, he did not take it back. Deputy Briggs lifted one hand toward Vance without turning to look at him. Fingers spread a clear and unmistakable signal. "I have this. Let me work." And Vance, who had spent 30 years taking orders from no one, shut his mouth and stepped back to the wall because she was right. This was hers to run, and she was running it clean and right, and a man who truly wanted to help would get out of the way of the person doing the helping. That was a new thought for him. He turned it over and found it true. "Mr. Pruitt," Briggs said, "I'm going to need you to stay on the property. You are not under arrest, but there are going to be questions tonight and tomorrow about that lockbox and about a kitchen phone the child says doesn't work and about a cell phone she says is kept in your desk. You can answer those questions cooperatively right here like a man with nothing to hide, or you can answer them downtown. That's your choice to make." Gerald looked at her for 1 second too long. Then he turned his head and looked at Sadie through the open door, and the thing that was in his eyes when he looked at the child was not love, and it was not worry, and it was not even anger. It was calculation, fast and cold, a man running numbers on how this played out from here, and plainly not liking the figures he was getting. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's your right," Briggs answered unbothered. "Wait by your truck." And he went. He did not shout. He did not make a scene or protest his innocence to the heavens. He turned and walked back across the wet gravel to his truck with the same clean, unbothered, unhurried silence he had arrived with, and that silence told Vance more than any amount of yelling ever could have, because innocent, frightened men do not go quiet and cold. They get loud. They cry. They beg you to believe them. They do not start in the space of a single breath, calculating. Sadie did not watch the truck. She watched Vance instead, the whole time steady, like he was the one fixed point in a room that had been spinning since the headlights first hit the windows. "Are you mad?" she asked him once the chapel door had been eased most of the way shut against the cold and the dark and the man waiting out in it. Vance came and crouched at the end of her pew, slow planting, his boots keeping both big hands loose and open and visible on his knees. "Yes," he said. He would not lie to her, not even to comfort her, because he understood already that she had been lied to comfortingly her whole short life, and that the lies had been a kind of theft. "I'm mad, but not at you. Never once at you, and I'm going to use it the right way." "What's the right way?" She asked it like she truly did not know, like she had never once seen anger used the right way, which he thought she likely had not. "The right way is, I answer the deputy's questions. I give her this letter and anything else in my pockets that might help. I sit right here on this bench, and I keep my voice down low, and I let the people whose actual job this is do their go. And I don't get in their way even when every bone I've got is telling me to the wrong way." He glanced once toward the door, toward the dark, where Gerald's silhouette waited by the truck. "The wrong way is the way he does it. Quiet. In the dark. Behind a locked box on a high shelf where nobody can see. I spent a whole lot of years being loud Sadie. Loud and hard. I thought that was the same as strong, and I thought strong was the same as safe. It took me too long, and it cost me too much to learn that loud and safe aren't even the cousins. Your Mr. Wade tried to tell me that more than once. I wasn't ready to hear it. I'm hearing it now. A little late, but I'm hearing it." Sadie studied his face for a long, long moment with those solemn, far too old eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little, and were trying right now against everything her life had taught her to decide whether to trust one more time. Then she did a thing that nearly took the legs out from under him. She slid down off the bench, crossed the small space of floor between them, and lowered herself to sit on the old boards beside his crouched bulk, close. Close enough that her thin shoulder very nearly touched his arm. Not touching, just close. A child testing the very edge of a thing she desperately wanted to be able to believe in. "You can read it now," she said quietly. "The letter. I want you to read it. I think it was always kind of for you anyway." Mom always said the end part was for you. Vance looked up at Deputy Briggs, who had come back inside and was standing near the door filling a page in her notebook in quick block letters. Deputy, the letter. Go ahead and read it, she said, glancing up. I'll want to see it after log it. But go ahead, Mr. Holden. I think you've earned the next page about as much as a man can. He drew the envelope back out of his jacket. The tape was soft and yellowed and gave way under his thumb without a fight the way old things do. His hands that had broken knuckles in fights he was not proud of, and rebuilt dead engines from the block up in the dark by feel alone, trembled now as he worked the single folded page free of its envelope and opened it under the warm low light. The first lines were practical, plain, because Wade had always put the help before the poetry. That was him right down to the bone, and seeing it in the boy's own handwriting undid something in Vance's chest. Carolyn, if you're reading this, it means you've hit a wall and you need more than one teacher and one school can give you. So here's what to do. Call the numbers on the back of this page. Food assistance, the county, legal aid, they're free. Don't let anybody tell you different. Emergency counseling. And ask for a woman named Diane at the county family office. She actually answers her phone, which makes her rarer than you'd think. Needing help does not make you a bad mother. It makes you a person in a hard spot, and there is no shame at all in a hard spot, but only in the people who'd use it against you. Sadie is the bravest kid in my class. She gets that from you even on the days you can't see it in yourself. Especially those days. Vance's eyes burned. He kept on. And if you can't reach anybody else, if every line goes dead and every door sticks and the whole world goes quiet on you, then find my father. His breath stopped dead in his chest. His name is Vance Holden. People on the road call him Diesel. He'll look like a thundercloud somebody stuffed into a leather jacket, and he'll talk to you like he wants you gone. And don't you let one bit of that fool you, Carolyn, not for a second. He taught me how to fix engines, it's true. But more than that, without ever once saying the words out loud, he taught me that broken does not mean worthless. That a thing can get bent all to hell and rusted through and left out in the weather and still be worth saving, still be worth the work if there's somebody willing to do the work. He forgot that about himself somewhere a long way back down the road. He forgot it hardest about the two of us, him and me, and that's a sorrow I carry. But it's still in him. I know it is. Maybe helping somebody else find their way out is the only thing that'll ever remind him. Maybe that's the only road back for a man like my dad. He's a good man buried under a few bad years, Carolyn. Dig a little. Don't take the first no. He'll show up. I'd stake my life on it. He'll show up. The chapel blurred and ran. Hattie, the deputy in the doorway, the ticking heater, the small warm weight of the girl sitting on the floor against his knee. All of it went soft and swimming at the edges. For 6 years, Vance had carried the absolute bone-deep certainty that the last thing his son ever felt for him was disappointment, that their final words traded hot and ugly in a driveway with the rain coming down were the whole and final sum of what Wade thought of his father, all he would have carried with him if the road had given him even one more mile to carry anything at all. And here, folded into a letter meant for a drowning mother and her brave, hungry little girl, written and sealed and tucked away years before that last argument, his son had left him standing not as a warning, not as a danger, as a refuge, as the last safe door at the end of a long, dark hall. He'll show up. The boy had written it like a fact, like gravity, like something he knew about his father that his father had not known about himself. Vance pressed the page flat against his chest with one enormous hand, the way a man holds something that still has a heartbeat in it, something he is afraid will stop if he lets go. Sadie watched him from the floor, patient, giving him the room he had given her up at the grave. "There's more," she said after a while. "In the bag, there's a picture too." She reached into the side pocket of her backpack and drew out a photograph creased straight down the middle from years of being folded and carried. It showed Wade crouched down beside a classroom bulletin board, grinning that grin, one arm around the shoulders of a much smaller Sadie, who clutched a single yellow flower in both fists, like a trophy she had won. On the back, in Wade's neat hand, Sadie Calloway, braver than she knows. My dad would like this kid. Vance stared at the photograph until the 6 years between himself and his son cracked clean down the middle like the crease in the paper. "He said you were his hero," Sadie said quietly. "Mr. Wade did. He told me once the day I was too scared to read out loud in front of everybody he sat by my desk. And he said his dad was the bravest man he ever knew. And he said being brave didn't mean you weren't scared. He said being brave meant doing the right thing while you were scared that the scared was supposed to be there. That's what made it brave. And then he said he wished his dad knew that's how he saw him. He looked sad when he said it. He said sometimes the people we love the most never find out how we see them, and that was just about the saddest thing there was in the whole world. And then he gave me a granola bar and told me to try reading just the first line, just one line, and we'd see from there. Outside, faint and ugly through the chapel walls, Gerald Pruitt's voice had risen, arguing into a phone, words floating up through the cold and the dark. Misunderstanding. I want this on record. That biker. My rights. But inside the small, bright chapel, Vance Holden heard none of it, not really. He heard only his son, not a ghost, not the cold, familiar weight of guilt he had carried so long. It had fused to his spine and become part of how he stood. A son, 6 years gone, still reaching for his father, reaching through the small, steady hands of a child who had refused to let kindness be buried in the ground with the man who taught it to her. County Child Services arrived 40 minutes later, a plain white sedan with state plates and a box of clean folded blankets visible through the back window. The woman who came up the path and into the chapel introduced herself as Dr. Loretta Steele, and the very first thing she did before anything else, before a single question, was crouch down to Sadie's level on the floor and explain that she was there to help Sadie understand what was going to happen next. Not to take over, not to speak for her, to help her understand. It mattered. Vance could see it mattering in real time in the way the girl's thin shoulders came down a half inch from where they had been riding up by her ears, in the way she kept hold of Wade's photograph but stopped crushing it. Deputy Briggs had Gerald wait by his truck while she took a preliminary statement, his clean, reasonable words going down on paper now, where they could be checked, where they would have to match other words later or stand exposed. And for once, the man's voice did not seem to fill up the whole sky the way it had when he first drove in. There were too many other adults in the picture now, too many witnesses, too much light, exactly the kind of light Wade had taught the girl to want and to trust. Reverend Moyne made fresh coffee in the office. Hattie produced another cup of cocoa, and from the lost and found bin by the door, a dry pair of socks, pink dotted with little white stars left behind by some other child months ago and never claimed. Sadie hesitated until Dr. Steele said gently, "You get to decide. I can help you change into these if you want, or you can do it yourself in the restroom, right there, with the door unlocked and Mrs. Boone standing right outside it the whole time. Whichever one feels better to you. There's no wrong answer. Choice. Such a small thing," Vance thought, watching from the wall, his son's letter still warm in his hand. Such a small thing to offer a person, and such a mighty, towering, world-altering thing when you hand it to a child who has been living without any. Sadie chose to do it herself. When she came back out, the two big socks bunched soft around her thin ankles, she somehow looked both younger than her 8 years and stronger than anyone in that room had any earthly right to ask an 8-year-old to be. Dr. Steele settled onto the pew, leaving a careful arm's length of space beside the girl, never crowding. "Sadie, I'm going to ask you some things now, but I want you to know the rules first. You don't have to make the story neat. You don't have to put it in the right order or make it sound right. You just tell me the next true thing, whatever it is, however it comes out. And if you don't know something, you just say, 'I don't know,' and that's a true thing too, and it counts." "Okay." Sadie looked at Vance. He did not nod at her like a coach trying to win a game. He did not push or prompt. He just held his son's letter against his chest and stayed still, an anchor in a leather jacket, and let her find the next true thing entirely on her own, because it was hers to find. "Mom was breathing?" Sadie said. "I checked. I put my hand by her mouth like Mr. Wade showed us for the fire drill, the recovery thing, and she was breathing. But she wouldn't wake up for dinner. I shook her shoulder. I shook it really hard. She just kind of moved and made a sound and went back down. And Uncle Gerald said she was being lazy and dramatic, and to quit bothering him, he was watching his show. The kitchen phone doesn't work anymore. The cord. It broke." She paused and corrected herself because Dr. Steele had asked for true things. "It got broke, and Mom's cell phone is in his desk drawer. He keeps it there. He says she texts the wrong people." Dr. Steele wrote slowly, nodding, never breaking her gaze for too long, never making the writing into a wall between them. "Who are the wrong people, do you know?" the county lady, Diane, from the letter, and my Aunt Bonnie. Mom's sister, she lives over in Ferncliff. It's like 40 minutes. Uncle Gerald says Aunt Bonnie fills Mom's head full of ideas about leaving, about going to stay with her. He doesn't like Aunt Bonnie to call. Her voice dropped. I tried to call Aunt Bonnie tonight off the kitchen phone before I left, but it's dead the kitchen one. So I remembered the letter and the wrist and what Mom always said. If it ever gets bad enough, find Wade's dad. But I didn't know where Wade's dad was. I only knew where Wade was. So I came to where Wade was. She said it so simply. I came to where Wade was, as though a grave were just an address you could walk to, as though a dead teacher were still, even now, the safest grown person a frightened child could name in all the world. And Vance understood sitting there on the hard floor with his knees screaming and his son's letter against his heart, that for this little girl, for a long and terrible stretch of her short life, his dead son very nearly had been exactly that, the safest adult she knew. A man in the ground. Deputy Briggs came back in from the gravel, her notebook closing with a soft snap. She looked at Vance, then at Dr. Steele, and then she crouched down once more to Sadie's level, bringing herself small. Sadie, your mom's at Mercy General now. The hospital. She's awake. She's talking to the doctors. And the very first thing she asked, the very first thing out of her mouth when she could talk was about you, where you were, whether you were safe. That's the first thing your mom wanted to know. Sadie pressed both hands flat over her mouth, and the sound that came out from behind them was not quite crying and not quite laughing. It was relief, raw and shapeless, and enormous, far too big for her small body trying to find some shape it could fit itself into. Will I have to go with Uncle Gerald? She asked when she could speak at all. Tonight. Will I have to go back with him? Not tonight, Briggs said before Vance could even draw the breath to answer it himself. There's going to be questions and paperwork and people you've never met before, and I'm not going to stand here and lie to you and tell you none of it'll be scary because some of it will, but not tonight. Tonight you're going to your Aunt Bonnie if she can get here, and she's already in her car, already on the road to us. And there are going to be grown-ups now whose whole entire job is making sure that tonight does not happen to you again. That's a promise I can make and keep. Vance had spent the better part of his life with a low, private contempt for paperwork. It had always felt to him like a net woven by soft people who had never once felt real wind in their teeth, a thing that slowed men down and tangled them up. But watching Sadie now, watching the careful worksheet logic of her small mind take hold of the word paperwork and turn it over and find it somehow against all odds reassuring, he understood a thing his son had probably understood all along. Sometimes the paperwork was not a cage at all. Sometimes it was a bridge, a record, a thing written down where it could not be unwritten, a way for the truth to stop being one frightened child's private burden to haul 3 miles alone in wet shoes through the dark and become instead a thing the whole world was finally formally on the record obligated to know and to act upon. They waited together in the third-floor family room while the doctors worked Vance and Sadie and Bonnie in the kind of fluorescent quiet that hospitals keep in the small hours. Bonnie had gone to find coffee. Sadie sat in a hard plastic chair too big for her, swinging her feet, the pink star socks bunched at her ankles, and Vance sat beside her with his hands hanging between his knees. And for a long while, neither of them said anything because they had both learned in their different ways that some silences are a kind of company. What if she's not okay? Sadie said finally very quietly to the floor. What if I waited too long? What if I should have left sooner? What if walking to the grave instead of running to a neighbor's was the wrong thing and she's not okay because I picked wrong? Vance turned to look at her. This was the thing he understood that she had been carrying under all the other things. The real weight, not Gerald, not the cold or the wet shoes or the dark. This. Sadie, look at me a second. He waited until she did. You did everything right. You hear me? Everything. You checked she was breathing. You tried the phone. You tried again. And when the phones were dead and the grown-up in the house wouldn't help you, went and got help, the only way you had left, which was your own 2 feet and a 3-mile walk in the rain. That's not picking wrong. That's a soldier's choice, kid. That's the choice somebody makes when every easy door's been nailed shut and they keep moving anyway. You don't get to second-guess a soldier's choice from a warm hospital chair after the fact. Nobody does. Not even you. But I went to a grave. I went to a dead person. You went to the safest person you could name, Vance said, and he sent you somebody alive. That's not a wrong turn. That's the system your Mr. Wade built for you, working exactly the way he meant it to. He couldn't be there, so he left you a map to somebody who could. You followed the map. The map worked. He's still taking care of you, Sadie. From the ground. Through me. That letter, that wrist, that worksheet, and all of it. It was him reaching forward in time to a night he knew might come. Leaving you a door. You found the door. You did everything right. Sadie's chin trembled. You promise. I don't make promises I can't keep. Ask anybody. I'm famous for it being a sour old man who won't promise anything. So when I tell you this is a promise, you can put weight on it. You did everything right. That's the promise. Whatever the doctors come out and say, that part doesn't change. You did everything right and you'll know it was right, even if the night turns out hard, because right and easy were never the same thing. Your Mr. Wade taught you that too, I'd bet. He did, Sadie whispered. He said the right thing and the easy thing hardly ever live at the same house. Smart man. Smartest man. They sat with that. After a while, Sadie's swinging feet slowed and then stopped, and her head began to droop, and somewhere past 2 in the morning she tipped sideways and fell asleep against the arm of the leather jacket Vance had not yet given her, but already somehow, both of them knew he would. He did not move for an hour. His arm went numb, and he did not move. A nurse passed and saw the big rough man sitting frozen so as not to wake the sleeping child, and she brought him a blanket without being asked and laid it over the girl and said nothing, and Vance nodded his thanks, and that was the night mostly. A numb arm, a borrowed blanket, a child finally sleeping. The first good night either of them had had in longer than either could say. When Bonnie came back with the coffee, she stopped in the doorway and looked at the two of them, the sleeping girl and the unmoving man, and she set the cups down soft and sat in the far chair and did not break it. Some things you do not break. You just sit in the room with them and let them be what they are. Deputy Briggs came by the garage one evening in mid-November, out of uniform off the clock. Vance had a sedan up on the lift, a single mother's car off page 9 of Wade's notebook, and he wiped his hands on a rag and waited because a deputy who comes around off the clock has something to say that the clock would not let her. I can't tell you the details, she said. You understand that. But I wanted you to hear it from a person and not a letter. The picture came together, the accountant, the mail, the phone records, the medication log that didn't match what Carolyn was actually getting. The county's got enough to keep him away from them for good. He'll fight the money part. He'll lose most of it. But the part that matters, the part where he can't be in a room with that little girl ever again, that part's done. That part's solid. Vance leaned against the lift and felt something he had not expected, which was not satisfaction. It was closer to grief. It's not enough, he said. What he did, there's no charge that fits it. No, Briggs agreed. There isn't. There's a whole category of harm the law can barely see, let alone punish. The slow kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't leave a mark anybody can photograph. She looked at the car on the lift. I've been doing this 22 years, Mr. Holden. You want to know the thing that keeps me up? It's not the loud cases. It's the ones like this, where some kid spends years trying to tell a people, and nobody believes her because the man hurting her has clean boots in a reasonable voice. Sadie's lucky. She had a teacher who taught her how to ask in a wrist she rode on, and a 3-mile walk in her, and an old biker who knew how to sit still and listen instead of taking over. Most of them don't get all 4 of those. Most of them just don't get believed. What happens to the ones who don't get believed? They grow up thinking their own memory is a liar, Briggs said. They grow up not trusting the thing inside them that says something's wrong. That's the real damage. Not what he did, what he made her doubt. And that's the part you and that little army of yours can actually fix if you want to know where to point all that money and all those motorcycles. She nodded at the notebook on the workbench. Believe them. Out loud. On the record. Before their courage runs out. That's the whole job. Your boy knew it. Wrote a worksheet about it. Safe people turn the lights on. Vance picked up the notebook and looked at his son's handwriting a long moment. Deputy, he said, Wade's safe ride. Once it's running right, I'd want somebody on it who knows the system from the inside, knows which doors stick and which ones open. You ever think about what you do after 22 years? Briggs almost smiled. I think about it every single day, Mr. Holden. She turned to go, then stopped at the bay door. Ask me again when it's real, when it's more than a notebook and a coffee can. Ask me then. I'll ask you then. And get that woman's car down off the lift before midnight, she said over her shoulder. She works the early shift at the diner, and she's been catching rides for a month. She's too proud to say it, but she's about out of people to ask. How do you know that? Same way your boy did, Briggs said. I notice things. It's the whole job. Noticing and then not looking away once you have. She left, and Vance stood a long while in the cold, bright garage with his son's notebook in one hand and a wrench in the other, turning her words over the way he turned over a part he meant to keep. Believe them out loud before their courage runs out. He thought about how many years of his own life he had spent doing the opposite, doubting, dismissing writing, past telling a frightened young teacher in a garage doorway that you can't save every broken kid. He thought about how that sentence must have sounded to a boy who had decided somewhere along the way to spend his life proving his father wrong about exactly that. Then he got the woman's car down, off the lift, finished it, topped off the fluids. She had been too proud to mention were low, and drove it to her himself so she would not have to find a ride to come get it. He left it in her driveway with the key tucked in a yellow envelope and no bill inside, just a note in his rough block print that said the shop had a special running this month, that she had qualified that there was nothing owed. Because some things you make certain are not anybody's fault that they needed them. His son had taught him that a long time ago, without either of them knowing a lesson was being taught. Vance was a slow student, but he was at last a student. The Sundays were how Vance learned to measure the healing because the healing did not announce itself any other way. It came in Sundays. He started driving out to Ferncliff on Sunday afternoons, 40 minutes each way, down the same Route 6 that had taken his son, though he did not say that part out loud, and neither did anyone else. The first Sunday, he almost did not go. He sat on the Harley outside his own garage for 20 minutes with the engine off, telling himself the family did not need an old biker, showing up uninvited. Telling himself Carolyn had enough on her plate without a stranger in her kitchen. Telling himself all the careful, reasonable things a frightened man tells himself when what he is really afraid of is being let in. Then he thought about the dead phone line, the 3 calls into silence, and he started the engine. Bonnie's house was small and yellow, and it had a porch that sagged a little on the left side, and the porch light burned all night, every night, and there were dry yellow flower stems in a jelly jar on the kitchen windowsill that nobody ever threw out. Carolyn had brought the jar from the old house. It was one of the few things she had gone back for. Vance understood why, without being told. The first Sunday he fixed the porch. Not because anyone asked, he had brought a toolbox out of 40 years of habit, the way some men bring wine. And while the women talked in the kitchen, he got down on his knees on the sagging boards and found the rotted joist underneath. And he said mostly to himself, well, that's the trouble right there. And Sadie came out and sat on the top step in her socks and watched him work with the grave attention of a small foreman. You're fixing it, she said. I'm fixing it. Mr. Wade would have fixed it too. He fixed Mrs. Aldridge's chair, the wheelie one. It squeaked and he fixed it with a thing from his pocket. Your Mr. Wade carried tools in his pockets. Just little ones. A screwdriver that folds. He said a teacher should be able to fix a squeak because a squeak in a quiet room can ruin a kid's whole morning if it's the kind of morning where everything's already too loud inside your head. Sadie picked at the wood of the step. I have mornings like that, where everything's too loud inside. He knew about those. Vance set his hammer down across his knee and looked at the child a long moment. I have those too, he said. Had them for years. Still get them. You want to know what I do? She nodded. I find something broke, he said, and I fix it. Just one thing. Doesn't have to be big. A porch, a squeak, a carburetor. Doesn't matter what. There's something about putting one broken thing back to rights with your own 2 hands that quiets down the loud. Your Mr. Wade knew that. That's why he carried the little screwdriver. It wasn't really for the squeaks. Sadie thought about that for a long time, the way she thought about everything, turning it over to check the underside. What was it for then? For the loud, Vance said. His own loud. Fixing the squeak was how he turned his own volume down so he could hear the kid who needed him. You can't hear a scared kid over your own noise. He figured that out young, younger than me. I'm still working on it. He went back to the joist. Behind them through the screen door, he could hear Carolyn laughing at something Bonnie said. A real laugh surprised out of her, and he heard it the way he heard a dead engine finally turn over that exact same lift in the chest. By the third Sunday, the porch did not sag, and the kitchen faucet did not drip, and the back gate latched the way a gate ought to latch, and Vance had run out of broken things to fix, which frightened him more than he would have admitted, because the fixing had been his way, in his reason, his cover. He stood in the yard with his empty toolbox, not knowing what a man was supposed to do at a house where everything already worked. Carolyn came out onto the fixed porch with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one and said, "You can just sit, you know. You're allowed to just sit. Wade used to do that. After a while, he stopped finding reasons. He'd just come and sit." So Vance sat. It was the hardest thing he did all month, and he did it every Sunday after. And it got easier the way everything gets easier, which is to say slowly and not in a straight line. He learned things in those Sundays. He learned that Carolyn had been a good student once before, that she had wanted to be a nurse, that she still had the textbook, and sometimes read it at night for no reason except that it was hers and nobody could take it. He learned that the sober days stacked up but did not erase the bad ones, that some weeks she counted forward, and some weeks she counted just to that day, and that was allowed too. He learned that Sadie had started sleeping through the night mostly, and that the night terrors when they came were quieter now, and that Bonnie had hung a string of little lights over the girl's bed because Sadie had said once that the dark felt safer when it had a few holes poked in it. He learned that grief and recovery are the same shape, that they both go in spirals, and not in lines that you pass the same places over and over, but each time from a little higher up, so that the view changes even when the ground does not. He had spent 6 years convinced his own grief was a wall he was stuck against. He was beginning to suspect it had been a spiral the whole time, and he had simply refused to climb. One Sunday in late November, Carolyn showed him the rest of the letter. The back of the page where Wade had written the phone numbers, the county, the legal aid, Diane's direct line. The numbers were faded but readable. Carolyn had circled Diane's in pen years ago and never called it. "I want you to know I'm calling her now," Carolyn said. No. Diane, for real this time. Bonnie made me promise. I've got an appointment Tuesday." She looked at the circled number a long moment. 6 years I had this. 6 years I carried his handwriting around and couldn't make myself dial one number on it. You know what stopped me? Not Gerald. Not really. Gerald was just the lock. The thing that stopped me was thinking I didn't deserve the help. That asking would prove I was the bad mother everybody already thought I was. Vance turned his coffee cup slowly in his big hands. "My son wrote you that needing help doesn't make you a bad mother," he said. "I read it. He wrote it down where you'd have to read it too." "He did. 100 times I read that line." "Took you 6 years to believe it." "It did. Took me 6 years to believe the part he wrote about me," Vance said. "So we're even. He wrote us both a letter, and we both spent 6 years calling him a liar. Stubborn." His voice caught. "Whole family of us. Stubborn as a stuck bolt." Carolyn laughed that surprised real laugh and wiped her eyes, and they sat on the fixed porch in the cold with their coffee and let the dead numbers on the back of the page finally start to mean something other than failure. It was Sadie who pulled the whole notebook into the light. Vance had brought it out to Ferncliff one Sunday, Wade's worn spiral notebook of names, meaning to show Carolyn a page. And Sadie had seen her teacher's handwriting from across the room and gone very still, and then come over and put her finger on it like touching something warm. "That's his," she said. "That's his writing. What is it?" "It's a list," Vance said, "of people your Mr. Wade was helping, or wanted to help, before." Sadie turned the pages slowly, reading the names with her lips moving. She stopped on one. "Travis," she said. "Travis Dean. He was in my class. He needed shoes. Mr. Wade got him shoes, but he made it like it was a contest, like Travis won them so it wouldn't be charity. Travis still doesn't know. He thinks he won a contest." She looked up. "Are you going to finish it, the list?" "I'm going to try. Can I help?" And that was how an 8-year-old girl became, in every way that mattered, the youngest founding member of Wade's Safe Ride. The one who could read her dead teacher's handwriting fastest, and who knew from the inside exactly how to give a child help without turning it into a thing the child would have to carry the shame of. She knew the contest trick. She knew the granola bar bought by accident trick. She knew better than any of the grown-ups that the whole secret of helping a proud, hungry child was to let the child keep being proud. You make it so it's not their fault they needed it, she explained to Vance and Cobb and the Reverend very serious in the church basement, where they sorted the coats as though she were teaching a class, which she was. If you make it their fault, even a little, even just with your face, they won't take it. And then they stay cold. So you make it like it just happened, like the coat was already going to be theirs and you're just the one carrying it over. Mr. Wade was the best at it. He never once made it anybody's fault. Cobb the road captain, 6'4" and 300 pounds of leather, and beard looked down at the small girl explaining the philosophy of dignity to a room full of grown bikers, and he had to turn around and find something to do with a box of mittens for a minute before he could speak again. She's right, he said finally, his voice thick. Kid's right. That's exactly it. That's the whole thing right there. Mr. Wade taught me, Sadie said. Yeah, Cobb said. I'm starting to think Mr. Wade taught everybody. Aunt Bonnie Calloway arrived close to 9 o'clock, 40 miles of wet road behind her, breathless, a work uniform still on, under her open coat, and raw, naked fear written across every line of her face. She came through the chapel door fast and then stopped dead just inside it when she saw the girl, as if she did not quite trust her own eyes, as if she had spent the whole drive afraid of what she might or might not find at the end of it. Sadie stood frozen for one stunned second. Then she broke and she ran, and Bonnie caught her up off her feet and folded down around her right there on the old floorboards, and held her the way a person holds something they had already begun somewhere in the back of their heart to give up for lost. She did not say anything at first. She just held on, rocking her face buried in the girl's brown hair, and Sadie clung back with both fists knotted in the fabric of her aunt's coat. And the whole room looked away to give them the privacy of it. When Bonnie could speak, she thanked every soul in the chapel one by one, her voice catching on each name as Reverend Vaughn gave them to her. The deputy, the doctor, Mrs. Boone, the Reverend himself. But when she came at last to Vance, standing big and quiet against the back wall with his son's letter still in his hand, she stopped. She took in the patches on the worn leather jacket. She took in the letter and the name written on the envelope in handwriting she plainly recognized. And her composure, the composure she had held together with spit and terror, the whole long, dark way down Route 6 came quietly apart at the seams. Carolyn tried to call you once, she said. Years ago, right after the funeral. Wade had written your number down for her on the back of one of his flyers in case she ever needed it. And when things first started getting bad with Gerald moving in, she dug it out and she tried. She tried 3 times that I know of, but the line was disconnected. Just a recording, she thought. Bonnie's voice broke clean in half. She thought it meant you didn't want to be found. That Wade's father didn't want anything to do with the people Wade had helped. She gave up on it. She told me, she said, his daddy's gone too. Bonnie, the number's dead, we're on our own. Vance remembered that disconnected phone. He remembered the long, gray months after Wade died, when he had let absolutely everything go dark. The bills and the meals, and the daylight and the front door, and the phone. Anything at all that required him to keep being a living man among the living. He had let the number die because answering it meant being someone, and he had not wanted to be anyone. And on the other side of that deadline, he understood now. A drowning mother had stood with a flyer in her hand, dialing into silence, deciding she was alone. I'm here now, he said. The 3 words came out rough and small, and they did not feel like nearly enough. He doubted anything ever would. Yeah, Bonnie said, still holding her niece, her eyes streaming freely now and unashamed. You are. You showed up. He said you would. She laughed, wet and broken and astonished all at once. That letter, Carolyn read me that letter so many times over the years, I could say it back to you word for word. He'll show up. She used to say it like a prayer when the nights got bad, like a thing to hold on to. Wade said his daddy would show up. And I'll be honest with you, mister. There were nights I thought it was just a dead man's wishful thinking. Just a kind lie a good young teacher told a scared woman to give her something to hold. And here you are, standing in this room. You showed up. And Vance Holden, 58 years old, a man. People crossed the street to avoid a man who had spent 6 years, certain his son had died, disappointed in him, stood in a small, bright chapel in a cemetery in the cold dark of October, and understood that his boy had been praying for him from the grave. For 6 long years, praying through 2 desperate women and 1 brave, hungry little girl, that the thundercloud in the leather jacket would finally remember what he had been put on the earth to be. Out on the gravel, headlights swung in again, a second cruiser here to take Gerald Pruitt's full statement and to begin the long, slow, quiet, carefully documented work of making certain that the man with the clean boots and the lockbox and the dead phone cord could never again be the only adult in a room with Carolyn Calloway and her daughter. The work that paper does. The bridge being built plank by plank in block letters in a deputy's notebook. Sadie pulled back from her aunt's arms just far enough to find Vance across the room. "Will you come," she asked him, "to the hospital to see my mom? Mr. Wade said you'd show up. I want you to be there when she sees you do it. I want her to see that the letter was true." Vance Holden, who had not wept in 6 years, who had buried every soft thing he had ever owned under leather and chrome, and a voice rough enough to keep the whole world at a safe distance, felt the very last of it give way at once like a dam that has held one season too many. "Yeah, kid," he said, "I'll come, I'll show up." Mercy General after midnight had a hush all its own, a quiet made of low machines and softer footsteps, in the particular tired kindness of people who do hard and necessary work in the small hours of the dark. Carolyn Calloway lay pale but awake under a clean white blanket in a room at the far end of the third floor, an IV taped to the back of one thin hand, her sister Bonnie in the chair, pulled close beside her, and Sadie pressed warm, and finally still against her other side, exactly where she belonged, where she should have been all along. Vance stood in the doorway. He had not come any closer than that. He did not want to crowd a woman who had been crowded her whole life by men who decided things for her, who took her phone and her mail and her medications and her sister and called it taking care of her. Carolyn looked at him for a long moment from the bed. She took in the jacket, the patches, the ash-gray beard, the big scarred hands hanging at his sides, the whole thundercloud of him filling up the doorframe. And then he watched a recognition move slowly across her thin, exhausted face, watched her match the shape of him standing there against a letter she had read aloud 100 times like a prayer in the dark. "You're his father," she whispered. "You're Wade's father. You came. You actually came." "I'm sorry I was late," Vance said, and his wrecked voice barely carried across the quiet room. 6 years late. I'm sorry. That number should never have been dead. I'm sorry." Carolyn's eyes filled and spilled over. "So was I," she said. "Late. I was so late to everything, late getting help, late getting out, late believing my own little girl. When she stood in that kitchen and told me what that house had turned into, what he was doing to all three of us, a little at a time, so slow you couldn't see it move." Her hand found Sadie's and held it tight against her own chest. "But she found you. She walked 3 miles in the rain in the dark, and she found you. My baby found the door. She found the one door I couldn't find for her." Sadie looked between her mother in the bed and the big man in the doorway, exhausted now past the very end of herself, swaying a little on her feet. And then she let go of her mother's hand, and she crossed the small room to Vance, and she reached up into the pocket of her thin hoodie and pulled out the paper crane. The white one. The first one. The one she had carried back down from Wade's grave before they left the cemetery because she had said it was not right to leave it behind. Not now that it had done its job. She held it up to him with both small hands. "I want you to have this one," she said. "I'll fold Mr. Wade a whole new one. A whole flock of new ones, every color. But you should have this one. It's the one that found you. It's yours." Vance took the small, soft, water-stained paper bird into his enormous scarred hands as carefully as he had ever held anything in the whole long course of his life, more carefully than he had held a wrench or a throttle or a rifle or any other thing those hands had known. And for the first time in 6 years, 3 months, in 12 days, he did not feel like a man standing at the bitter end of his son's story reading the last page over and over. He felt like a man who had just been handed the next one. The weeks that came after did not heal in a clean, straight line because nothing real and worth anything ever does. Carolyn stayed at Mercy General 4 days, and then she went home with Bonnie to the small house in Ferncliff, to a kitchen with a phone that worked and a porch light that stayed burning all night long because Bonnie said a child should always, always be able to see where home was from the road, no matter how late or how dark. The medication had been a near thing, a very near thing, too many of them taken on a bad night out of a box that someone else held the only key to. The doctors used careful, gentle words about it. Vance used careful silence and a standing open offer to drive anyone who needed driving anywhere they needed to go any hour. No questions asked and no charge taken. The investigation into Gerald Pruitt moved with the slow, gray weight of all real and proper things. There were interviews, the same questions asked 4 different ways on 4 different days. There was a forensic accountant the county brought in who followed the money and found that Carolyn's disability checks had for 2 years been routing through an account that Gerald alone controlled. That he had been taking a cut he called rent, and a cut he called groceries, and a cut he called nothing at all. There was the county woman Diane, the very one from Wade's letter, who turned out to have been trying to reach Carolyn for 2 solid years and kept hitting a wall. And the wall had a name, and the name was Gerald Pruitt, who intercepted the mail and answered the phone and said Carolyn was sleeping. Carolyn was not well. Carolyn could not come to the door. There was the lockbox and the cut phone cord and a pattern that when it was finally all laid out flat on a table under honest fluorescent light, stopped looking anything at all like a confused little girl's overactive imagination and started looking like precisely what Sadie had said it was the entire time to anyone who would listen, which for too long had been no one. Gerald did not go to prison, not for the kind of harm he had done, the slow, quiet kind that happens behind closed, unlocked doors and leaves no marks a doctor can photograph. The law was not built well to catch that kind, and Vance had to make a hard and lasting peace with it. But Gerald was barred from any contact with Carolyn or Sadie by order on paper on the record. The financial matters became the kind of matters that follow a man and do not let go, that show up on records and in courtrooms for years. And the house, the real one, the one with the blue porch light, where Carolyn had been kept slow and sleeping and small, was emptied out and left behind for good. And Gerald Pruitt drove out of their story the same clean, quiet, unbothered way he had driven into it, which was the only kind of victory the law had to give, and which Vance came in time to understand was enough. Safety restored, records made, doors opened that had been held shut. A child believed before her courage finally ran all the way out. Sometimes that was the whole of justice a quiet world allowed, and Wade Vance thought would have called it good and gotten right back to work. What Wade would not have let him do not for 1 second was stop there. The week after Sadie found him at the grave, Vance went out to the garage and opened his son's boxes for the first time since the funeral. He had carried them home from Wade's little apartment in a fog 6 years ago, stacked them against the back wall, and built a high, thick wall in his own mind around them, and never once let himself look. Now he sat down on an overturned 5-gallon bucket under the single hanging bulb, and he opened them one at a time slow. Lesson plans, dozens of them in that neat, even hand. Thank you cards in crayon from children, dozens of those too, kept and treasured. A chipped coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Teacher," which Vance held for a long time. And then at the bottom of the third box, a spiral notebook worn soft at every corner, filled cover to cover in Wade's writing with names. Families who needed rides to work or to the doctor. Kids who needed winter coats with sizes written beside them. A single mother out on Route 9 whose car had been dead in the side yard a whole month. A boy named Travis who needed shoes in a size the school donation bin never seemed to have. A whole quiet, patient ledger of small, specific human needs that his son had been tracking and meeting and tracking, again, one granola bar and $1 flour and one disconnected phone number at a time, right up until the night the road took him. Vance read every single page, and somewhere around the third page, he stopped feeling like a grieving man reading his dead son's notebook, and he started feeling like a man being handed a job. An inheritance, a road that still had miles left in it, waiting for someone to ride them. He made some phone calls. Vance Holden had not made a friendly telephone call to another living human being in 6 years, but it turned out the old numbers in his head still worked, and it turned out the men on the other end of them had been waiting a long, long time for him to pick the phone back up. They had not pushed. They had only waited the way you wait for a wounded animal to come back to the fire on its own. The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club had been Vance Holden's whole life for 30 years, before grief turned him into a ghost who haunted only one cemetery. He had ridden with them, bled with them, buried men beside them. He had been their president once, years back, when the patch on his chest still meant something to him, bigger than a thing he no longer felt he had earned the right to wear. He had drifted out after Wade died the way a tide goes out, stopped writing, stopped answering, stopped coming around. And they had let him go the way you let a hurt brother go, watching from a respectful distance, leaving the door propped open behind him, just like the chapel door, just in case. When Vance walked into the clubhouse on a cold Tuesday in November and laid Wade's worn notebook open flat on the scarred wood of the bar, The whole loud room went quiet. Big men with gray coming into their beards and patches, older than some of the prospects, looked down at the open notebook full of children's names and sizes. And then they looked up at Vance, and then they looked at one another, and something passed between all of them without a word. My boy kept a list, Vance said into the quiet. His voice did not shake, though it wanted to. Of folks around here who needed a hand. Kids, mostly. He died before he could finish working through it. I aim to finish it. All of it, and then keep going because the lists don't ever really end. But I can't do it alone. I tried doing things alone for 6 years, and all I built was a hole in the ground I visit on Fridays. So I'm asking. I haven't asked anybody for anything in a long time. I'm asking now. A man named Cobb, the road captain, who had helped carry Wade's casket 6 years before and had never once in all that time asked Vance why he disappeared afterward, looked down at the open notebook for a long, long moment. When he raised his head, there was something wet at the corner of one hard old eye that he did not bother to wipe away or hide. What do you need, Diesel, Steve? Cobb said. Just tell us what you need. You should have asked 6 years ago. Door was always open. But you're asking now, so what do you need? By the end of November, with Reverend Vaughn handling all the donations through the church so that every dollar stayed clean and counted and documented, and with Deputy Briggs quietly connecting them to the county services that had been there all along, but that families like Carolyn's somehow never managed to find, until it was nearly too late, Vance had built something small and real in his sons. He called it Wade's Safe Ride. It was not fancy. It was nothing his son would ever have wanted made fancy with banners and galas and a name in big letters. It paid for bus passes and winter coats, emergency groceries dropped on porches without a word. School lunch balances quietly zeroed out at the front office, no name attached, no questions asked of the child or the family. And it fixed cars, the single parents on the back pages of Wade's notebook, the ones whose entire lives hung by a thread on a vehicle that would not turn over, brought their dead cars to Vance's garage, and Vance Holden fixed them, everyone, and charged nothing at all when nothing was what people had. Every time he turned a wrench under a lifted hood, every time he coaxed a dead engine roaring back to life out of nothing but stubbornness and skill, he heard his son's voice as clear as if the boy were leaning in the garage doorway with rain on his jacket. Broken doesn't mean worthless, and for the first time in 6 long years, the memory did not open him up like a knife dragged across the grain. It steadied his hands. It told him where to set them. It put him to work. The first real snow of December fell soft and slow over Hollow Pine Cemetery, quiet enough to make the whole town seem to be holding its breath and listening. Vance Holden stood beside his son's grave in his black leather jacket, zipped up to the throat against the cold, a single white rose in his hand. But he was not alone this time. He was not anything close to alone. Sadie stood on one side of him in a red winter coat that Bonnie had bought 2 sizes too big on purpose, so the child would have room to grow into it across the seasons to come. Carolyn stood on the other side, thinner than the photographs of her good years, but upright now, steady on her own 2 feet, clean and sober 3 months, and fighting hard for every single day of it, one hand resting light and sure on her daughter's shoulder. Behind the 3 of them stood Bonnie and Hattie Boone, and Reverend Vaughn with his head already bowed, and Deputy Joan Briggs out of her uniform for once, and Dr. Loretta Steele, and a scattering of teachers from Calder Elementary who still remembered after all these years the substitute who drew motorcycles in the margins of spelling worksheets and kept extra granola bars in his desk drawer for reasons he never explained to anyone. And down the slope out past the iron gate, the road had begun to rumble. Vance heard them before anyone saw them, the way he had heard that particular kind of thunder. His whole life felt it first come up through the frozen ground and into the soles of his boots before it ever reached his ears. Then they crested the rise on Route 6 and came on into view, a long, slow, gleaming line of them headlights burning in the gray December afternoon chrome, catching what little light the snow let through. The Iron Saints, 43 of them riding 2 by 2, engines held low and easy and respectful, because Cobb had passed the word down the line, and the word had been simple and clear. We ride in slow, we ride in quiet. This one is for a teacher and for his old man. Sadie's mouth fell open. Carolyn's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder. 43 motorcycles rolled in through the cemetery gate and came to rest in a long row along the gravel, and 43 riders killed their engines as one, all together on some signal Vance could not see, And the great rushing silence that came flooding in behind all that thunder was the loudest and the fullest and the most alive silence Vance Holden had ever in his life stood inside of. They had come to dedicate Wade's safe ride. They had come with a check folded into the inside of Cobb's vest, money raised in 3 short weeks, of passing a coffee can at every bar and shop and gas station on their whole circuit, dollar by dollar, the cheap, real kind of proof Wade had always believed in. They had come carrying boxes of coats and boxed up groceries and a hand-painted wooden sign for the side of Vance's garage lettered by hand. But mostly Vance understood, looking down at all of them, standing bareheaded in the falling snow, beside their machines, they had come for him. For Diesel. To stand behind the brother who had finally come riding back home out of his grief, and to stand for the young man they had all helped lay in this ground 6 years ago, and had never once any of them stopped grieving. Cobb walked up the slope alone through the thin snow, his beard going white with it, and he put the folded check into Vance's free hand, and then he gripped Vance's shoulder hard, hard enough to mean every bit of it. "For the kids on your boys' list," Cobb said, his rough voice low, "and every kid that comes along after them. We finish what he started, brother. All of us, together, for as long as it takes. That's the club's now, too. You don't carry it alone anymore. You hear me? Not anymore." Vance could not speak. He nodded. It was every single thing he had. Sadie stepped forward through the snow, small and red-coated, and brave, holding a paper crane folded out of bright yellow construction paper. She knelt down at the base of Wade's headstone and set it there careful beside Vance's white rose and the small flag stirring stiff in the cold wind. For a moment she said nothing at all. She had learned over these 3 hard months that silence could be a peaceful and a holy thing when the right people stood inside it with you. Then she whispered just to the stone, just to the name. "I found him, Mr. Wade. I found your dad. He showed up just exactly like you said he would. And now there's 43 more of him standing right down there. So I think you can stop worrying about him now. I think he's going to be okay. I think we all are." Vance turned his face away out toward the long, silent line of motorcycles and the men standing bareheaded beside them in the snow. But not before Sadie saw the tears standing bright in his eyes. She did not say anything about them. Children who have been hurt understand the dignity of looking away better than most grown people ever learn to. Instead, she reached into her red coat and drew out the worksheet, the old one, soft and gray, with handling Wade's print across the top of it, now kept safe inside a clear plastic sleeve so it would never wear away. "Things that make me feel safe." The list had grown longer. Warm soup was still there at the top. Mom's singing was still there. Yellow flowers still there. But underneath the old lines in careful newer handwriting, steadier than the pencil that came before it, Sadie had added more. People who listen, doors that stay open, Deputy Joan, Aunt Bonnie, Dr. Loretta, Mrs. Boone's Cocoa, the loud bikes that come when you call them, and Mr. Vance's garage. Vance read the last line of it, twice the snow landing soft on the plastic sleeve in her hands. "Mr. Vance's garage," he said, and his rough voice cracked clean down the middle. "Well, that makes me sound downright respectable." Sadie almost smiled up at him. "You're trying," she said. "Mr. Wade said trying counts. He said trying counts the most of anything." Hattie laughed softly behind them, a wet sound, and even Deputy Briggs's serious face came loose at the edges. And down the slope, one of the Iron Saints, a giant of a man with a beard halfway to his belt, wiped his eyes with the back of a leather glove and looked very hard at the sky and pretended the whole time that it was only the cold getting to him. Vance knelt down beside the grave, his knees complaining loud in the cold the way they always did, and he brushed the soft white snow away from his son's carved name with his bare hand, gentle the way you brush hair back from a sleeping face. For 6 years he had come to this stone every Friday only to apologize to it, to say sorry to granite. Now for the first time he came to report. "You were right, Wade," he said quiet just for the two of them under the wind. "Some things that get broke can still be fixed. Not the same as they were before, maybe never the same, but enough. Enough to carry a little light from one place to another. You knew that about me before I knew it about myself. You wrote it down in a letter and you tucked it away where you knew I'd have to find it eventually, where I couldn't argue you out of it because you couldn't be there to say it to my face." His voice went to gravel and rust. "Stubborn. You always were the most stubborn kid. Got that straight from your old man, And I never once apologized for it, and I'm not going to start now because look what it did. Look what your stubborn did, son. She walked 3 miles, and then she found me. Carolyn reached down and took her daughter's hand. Reverend Vaughn bowed his head deeper, and his lips moved without sound. Down on the gravel, 43 men stood bareheaded in the falling snow, beside their silent machines with their heads lowered, and the snow came down soft as forgiveness over all of it, settling without preference or judgment, on leather and on chrome, and on granite and on grass, on the living and on the dead alike, on the raws and on the small, bright yellow crane. Vance stood back up slow, his knees popping. The wind came up cold off the western ridge, and Sadie shivered hard in her too big red coat, and without a single word, Vance Holden shrugged himself out of his heavy leather jacket and draped it down around the little girl's thin shoulders. It swallowed her nearly whole, hanging to her knees, heavy with road dust and engine oil and 40 years of weather and miles. And she gathered it closed at the throat with both small hands and held it there like a blanket, like armor, like a thing being handed down from one generation to the next. The man people had once crossed the street to avoid stood there in his shirt sleeves in the falling snow, the cold biting at him, and him not minding it one bit beside a little girl who had walked 3 miles in wet shoes through the dark to find help when the whole world had gone quiet on her. And neither one of them, not the old biker nor the brave child, looked the least bit lost anymore. As they all left the cemetery together at last, the whole gathering of them, the cars pulling out slow, and the 43 motorcycles falling into a low rumbling line behind to escort the small family safely home through the snow, Vance glanced back over his shoulder just once. The yellow paper crane rested against Wade's headstone, bright as a struck match against all that white. And as the wind moved across the fresh snow and reached the grave, the small paper wings of it lifted just slightly, just barely, just enough as if something small and brave that had been folded up tight and hidden away for a very long time had finally decided at last that it was ready to fly. Vance Holden turned his face back toward the road, toward the long, rumbling line of his brothers waiting for him with their engines low, toward the woman getting her life back one honest day at a time, and the child wrapped in his jacket, and the worn notebook full of names that still needed answering, and all the miles of work that were waiting out there in the cold for a man willing to do them. And for the first time in 6 years, 3 months, and 12 days, Vance Holden rode out through the iron gate moving towards something instead of away from it. His son had asked the world to dig a little, to look underneath the bad few years for the good man he swore was still buried down there. A drowning mother had held that letter and read it like a prayer in the dark when she had nothing else left to hold. And a small, brave, hungry girl had walked 3 miles in the cold rain to test with her own 2 feet whether a dead man's promise could possibly be true. And the thundercloud in the leather jacket had shown up, just exactly the way Wade always swore he would.